Earlier this year, I inherited a bunch of old Macs and computer parts, and for the past 3 years, I've been trying to visit VCF Midwest up in Chicago, where there's this odd blend of old computers, radio, broadcast gear. Honestly, it's hard to pin down exactly what it is. And I also had no idea how overwhelming the 2-day event would be. Overwhelming in a good way, that is. I saw LGR was talking to hundreds of people, and I also saw the 8-bit guy, Mackie and Macintosh Librarian, Big Bad Bench's Wild Bodged Up Macs, Dave's Retro Video Lab, Adrian from Adrian's Digital Basement, and, well, too many people to list here. I spent time at Boost looking at this ESP32 drive emulator for the Apple Lisa, a guy walking around wearing a 46 on a helmet playing Doom because, of course, a custom Wi-Fi card from before Wi-Fi existed, and even this cool experimental Pico-based PCMCIA card that can emulate a bunch of other cards by YYZ Kevin. But hold on, I haven't even talked about how I got up there. I'll get back to Chicago in a minute, but since it has kind of the spirit of a more organized swap meet, I figured it was the perfect place to bring some of the old Macs I inherited. It's better for them to find new life with a collector or have someone get them back up and running for another 40 years than for them to just sit on a shelf here at the studio. And of course, going through these old computers, I had a few fond memories. Like this Performa 637 my aunt had was the same model I played Myst on with my family. And the Mac Plus, it's just iconic. And we also had one of those when I was a toddler. Anyway, blending a little of the new with the old, I used this BlueSCSI to back up the files off all my aunt's old Macs before I wiped them clean. The BlueSCSI has a Raspberry Pi Pico inside that it uses to emulate various SCSI devices. It's a really handy tool when you're dealing with any of these old kinds of hardware. Anyway, I crammed everything I could fit inside my new Leaf, and I'm actually going to do a separate video on my first EV road trip, so subscribe if you want to see how that thing went. But I got up to Chicago on Friday and got to come in and meet up with a few of the YouTubers who are setting up their booths. I also went and put a couple of my boxes in the free pile, and I kid you not, everything except for this Word book was gone within like 5 minutes. The free pile was fascinating to observe from afar. It kind of had a life of its own. And now here's the thing, you're seeing a bunch of different clips here. Walking through the show floor was just an extremely overwhelming experience, in a good way. But here's the problem I had. It was so hard to be anywhere for more than like a minute or two before my eyes would catch something else amazing in the background. Then it was a matter of like, how do I go see that thing and also not be socially awkward in the middle of talking about something else that's right in front of me? I think a lot of people there had the same problem though, and it's not like most of us are social butterflies anyway. But if I did drop out of a conversation abruptly to go look at something else, trust me, it's not you, it was my easily distracted brain. But there were a few things I saw at the show that stood out. The first one was this completely custom CRT analog control board. Everything on the right side of this box is a custom open source CRT analog board design. That means if you have a tube, even if all the control circuits for it are shot and the analog board's destroyed, you could revive it with this. And all the parts, even the flyback transformer, are new hardware. Apparently they still make these things to keep like old arcade machines going. Honestly, I learned more about how CRTs work in 10 minutes talking to Thomas, who built this thing, than I did from years watching YouTube videos and reading blog posts. That's one of the best things here. Like, you know of old tech, but there are people here who know how it works. Sometimes even the people who built the things. Thomas also had this 3D printed demo of how the CRT screen works to block the 3 individual electron beams so that they can just see the red, green, and blue phosphors on the end. Cool stuff. But speaking of the people who built these things, I was looking at Ron's old PowerBook display and noticed the 180C, which was my favorite laptop in that era, one that I basically ran into the ground. But I noticed the PowerBook had Glypha running on it, or Glypha, or however you say that. And this guy started playing, and I was talking to him about PowerBooks. And then I noticed his badge said John Calhoun, a name that I remembered from the thousands of times I had opened up Glypha and Glider as a kid. He wrote those games, like right there in front of me, one of the shareware kings of the Mac universe, and he was just walking around taking in all the sights and sounds just like anyone else. It's great to talk to people online, but there's just a totally different connection when you meet face to face, and a place like VCF is perfect for that. But not all the tech you see at VCF is nostalgic in a good way. Like in the modern era, we have things like the Humane AI pin that just makes you scratch your head. It wasn't any different in the 80s though. Mac 84 had this Personix head tracking input device, and I mean, it looks like a good idea on the surface. You control the mouse movement on your Mac with your head. But then you think about that for like 2 seconds, and unless you have a physical disability that requires you to use your head is not a very good input device. I tried out the demo, and it took all of 10 seconds to have a sore neck, especially leaning over like I was. I also got to watch Sean from Action Retro struggle through a game of Shuffle Puck, and he was actually finding ways to make it work, but I mean, he would, being the guy who uses a literal tasty cake as an input device. Something a little less cursed is Meshtastic, and the mesh at the show was up to like 200 devices, and the most impressive part of that mesh was this. This is a Meshtastic radio inside a Commodore 64. There's a radio inside this cartridge, and there's even Meshtastic 64 custom software on a floppy to make it all work. So of course I had to test it. Apparently the software for this thing was being tweaked right up until Saturday, so I found this bug. Since my node hadn't been discovered on this thing before, it showed up as question marks, and that bug also ate up the first character of the message. But I mean, look at this. Modern LoRa networking on a 40-plus-year-old computer. How cool of a demo is that? If you want to read more about it, Jim64 has a whole post up about it on his blog. I'll link to it below. And for Meshtastic, I'll also give an honorable mention to the guy I met with a hacker pager who demoed this fun little Easter egg. Around that same place, though, my timing senses tingled when I spotted an oscilloscope with a clock signal on it, and not just one, but two. I spent some time talking to Tom about his massive array of ADTRAN hardware, and he had a full setup showing how time division multiplexing, or TDM, worked, and how clocks and synchronization were important in getting an efficient network. It's something I think a lot of people don't even think about nowadays, but like when he switches the clock reference off so each unit has its own timing signal, the whole network goes out of whack. I don't think my dad ever had one of these Firebird, and yes, that's spelled B-E-R-D. I don't think my dad ever had one of these, but I'm sure he ran into timing and signaling issues on some of the T1 and ISDN lines he managed. And I mean, my dad is still working with ISDN at some of his radio studios. That's what these Telos boxes are using. But anyway, once he switched back to the universal clock, the two signals lined up and data could flow again. It was so fun to see and to also talk to someone who probably has a whole lifetime of knowledge on the topic of timing and data transmission, and that was just one of the many interesting telecom demos. But I did have one little side mission that I brought to VCF. I had my aunt's old hard drive, the one out of her old Mac Classic, and it worked when I made that video a couple months ago. But it stopped working the next time I booted it up after I finished that video. The drive platters would spin up, but I couldn't get it to mount. I found out BlueSCSI had a booth, and they offered to try to recover data off SCSI drives with something called initiator mode. So I had to try it. Basically, if you have a SCSI hard drive like mine, you can plug it straight into a BlueSCSI and it'll spin up the hard drive and immediately try reading all the data off of it onto an SD card. With a lot of these old drives, you might only get one or two more uses before they die. Unfortunately, while the drive did spin up, BlueSCSI said there was an error code. We looked it up, and it said hardware error. Luckily, some of these old quantum drives would just have a bit of rubber inside that would turn sticky and it would stop the head from moving. Maybe that was the case here? After breaking the warranty sticker, I found out that no, that wasn't the case. Hard disk platters should be nice and shiny, but these were not that. That stuff you see is whatever happens to rubber when you spin coat a hard disk platter with it. So I don't think this thing's coming back. But I did pick up a couple BlueSCSIs for my other old Macs like this one, and talk to a few people about the history of BlueSCSI, ZuluSCSI, and other projects like RASCSI. And apparently there's a bit of drama in that community, and honestly, right now I don't know much about it, but if you know more, let me know in the comments. But there were so many things to see. Like the Dayton Computer Museum brought this awesome relay-based binary digital computer. ConMega was there with a massive 70-pound hard drive, IBM's 3380 HDA, which I believe he said was the first gigabyte drive. It had 2 sets of read-write heads, and it was so big it needed an external motor and a belt drive to keep it spinning. And of course there was ShadyTel, providing analog and cell phone service for everyone. And Initech, a make-believe corporate network straight out of 1999 with this PowerBook to match. And ProtoWeb, where I got to relive the early internet and even hold a boxed copy of the first web browser I ever used. And there was an entire weather channel set up across multiple tables where I got to trigger an avalanche warning using EAS. These things all take a serious amount of effort to reverse engineer. And that also reminds me of Analytics Lounge's working scanning electron microscope. At first I noticed that they were using a Pi Pico to control voltages on this replacement board. But what was even more amazing was people could just walk up and use an electron microscope and mess with all the knobs. Where else are you going to get to do that? This is just ridiculous. And the funniest thing, I just had to laugh when I saw this. I saw this old Acorn computer and the poor thing just had a sign with the tiniest print saying, "I have died." I mean, it happens. This is old tech. I just hope whoever brought the thing can get it back up and running. But 2 more quick honorable mentions. Juicy Crumb Systems was showing me how they prototyped with the Pico to save a bunch of iMacs with perfectly good displays from being thrown in the trash. I think between ESP32s, Picos, and Arduinos, more e-waste was saved from landfills than any other technology in the past 50 years. Finally, I got to talk to Avery about the Zenith Phone Vision, a literal one-of-a-kind prototype for paid broadcast TV back before the internet was even a dream. In like the 1930s, Zenith was trying to get people to put these set-top boxes in their homes, and they had an early form of analog DRM. I guess that'd be ARM or ARM, but it would keep a running tally of what programs people watched and bill them later. How insane is that? What's more insane is that this thing is being reverse engineered piece by piece almost 100 years later, and it's working. It was definitely technology ahead of its time. Not in a good way, of course. I just mean if the broadcast industry gets its way, I'm sure that the new ATSC3 standard might finally get there. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, subscribe to Gearling Engineering. We're going to talk more about ATSC3 at some point. But there are literally hundreds more things I saw at VCF that I didn't include here. I was going to try covering everything I took videos of, but I realized my first cut was like 2 hours long. Would some of you watch that? Yeah, sure. But there are other videos that cover things better. And if you made one of those, please post it in the comments. Maybe I can get a link up in the description too. And there were also a bunch of presentations going on. The only two that I was able to make were on Ahmad's presentation on reverse engineering the PC-110 and the free concert the Stop Bits gave with some fun songs about old computers. There were just too many things to see in the hall to remember that there were actually other things going on too. And we don't have to talk about the game of Quake 3 Arena I dropped into and was 7th out of 8. But all this to say, VCF Midwest was an amazing experience. Meeting people in person though, that's the best part. We all have this shared passion for technology, but coming together, it's like the anti-AI. Instead of having computers take away our human interaction, we all came together. There wasn't really any social media, no screen names. We shared the things that we loved. I really hope more people can see the benefits of retro computing. I think modern engineers can learn a lot from what makes a product truly good by looking at what hardware from back in the day is beloved and what things are forgotten in the dustbins of history. Until next time, I'm Jeff Gearling.